Transfers, and more transfers. We got sporting directors, wingers, midfielders, players. Let's properly do an Arsenal transfer show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is our morning Arsenal transfer show, joining you every single day at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routine indeed. I hope you've had a fantastic start to your week and recovered somewhat. Well, middle part of the week, kind of recovery, if you like. You may notice a little extra spring in the step, and that's because I'm just kind of done being down about Tuesday. And it's not because, Liverpool lost last night. Spurs won. That's not a reason to be happy. Never be happy if Spurs get a result. I just feel more energized. I just kind of reflected a little bit yesterday and thought, what's the point? What's the point of being so down about this and kind of falling into the trap of misery and frustration? And I think actually what happened was I was reading far too much negativity. I was falling into that trap. I don't know if you felt the same way of reading through kind of like toxic, spewing, horrible comments about stuff and getting drawn into kind of discussions I didn't need to get drawn into. And now I feel as though I'm back on track. And listening to I've spoken to a couple of people yesterday that certainly gave me a bit more perspective. Listening to a couple of podcasts to give things a little bit more of a feeling, but it doesn't mean that we haven't got the same energy, the same kind of, ambition for Arsenal this window, because they need to do some business. Arsenal need to spend some money, and we're going to talk about that and a little bit more as well. Let's jump, though, to the chat box. Good morning to you all. Hope you're doing good. Hope you're doing well. Blackshine, Tom, Rowan, Mark, Granddaddy Gunnar, Paul, Pika, Who, A1, Franklin, Rich, Matt G, Gavin, Glenn, Shari, Mike, Errol. We've got Elder and Nara Silky and Carlton and Amesy and Jamil and plenty more of you guys and girls in the chat box this morning. We're trying, of course, to reach our usual daily target, despite all of the spewing of horribleness. We absolutely have still managed to hit these targets, despite the mood being very much down of late. We've still managed to hit these targets. So if you could be ever so kind as to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. That would be incredibly appreciated. So, yes, thank you to you all for your kindness. Thank you to you all for your support, and for those that left some kind words as well in the last few days as well, and that you're appreciative of, despite the fact that the mood is low, the shows still indeed do go on. Let's jump, though, to today's slides, and we start with Florian Pletterberg, who reports in Sky Germany that Bryan Mbeumo is indeed an Arsenal transfer target. However, it is not for January, he says, but instead that Mbeumo is indeed a target for Arsenal in the summer. But the summer transfer window is where Mbeumo could potentially be pursued by Arsenal. We know that at the point of which we get to the end of this season, he will have a year plus one left on his contract as well. And it makes plenty of sense, I think, from an Arsenal point of view, an Mbeumo deal, because he offers plenty of quality in the attack and in wide areas as well. I really do think that, Mbeumo could be that kind of the middle ground between that perfect Bukayo Saka cover, but also someone who offers us, depth and goals in more of a central area as well. So Bryan Mbeumo is a player I like, but it seems indeed that January will come too soon, and that the summer will be when he is potentially considered more seriously as a target for Arsenal. Now, the big kind of headline act, if you will, of transfer targets this week is definitely the man on the back of the shirt I'm wearing today from my own travels in the Basque Country earlier, or not earlier this year, but the end of last year. And Nico Williams of Athletic Club continues to be heavily linked with the move. We saw John Cross, the Mirror, also reporting this yesterday, that Arsenal are very keen on him. However, there is not conflicting reports, but certainly reports that would give the indication that a move for Williams is unlikely during this window. And I'll combine these two stories, I think, together because David Ornstein spoke on the Athletic podcast yesterday and said, I think by and large that Arsenal are going to go with what they have, which again will not be music to the ears of many fans who are baying for signings as Arsenal look to compete for a trophy that many feel Arteta needs to deliver. That's David Ornstein speaking on the Athletic FC podcast. And I absolutely cannot, without a shadow of a doubt, not feel empathy for those that are baying for signings. And that if we get to the end of this January transfer window and Arsenal haven't added anyone, perhaps even not even tried to sign anybody, there is going to be a humongous and very much justified sense of frustration and anger, I think, towards Arsenal for not taking advantage of what is clearly a very opportunistic situation for the club. Yes, there are mitigating circumstances regarding the squad right now. We've lost our best player. Our other best player is not in good shape right now, having returned from injury and illness now as well. There are other key players missing in the squad, like Ben White, for example. It seems that there is this. I seem what we don't quite know right now is the clarity. What we're lacking right now is clarity about who it is or why it is that there is a reluctance. Because we're hearing these reports that Arteta really does, and certainly what I have heard, certainly does really appreciate not just Nico Williams, but other signings as well. And so you have to ask the question, why? Because the money is there. Arsenal can spend. There's not financial restrictions stopping them from going in and activating a release clause of 50 or so million pounds for a Nico Williams. Yes, the wages are certainly humongous and there would be negotiation needed because, as I spoke to you yesterday, there's a potential that Nico Williams, were he to arrive, could potentially be needed to offer a wage that is, well, higher than any other amount of money we've paid for a player so far. And that's just the reality of trying to buy a player who is at a club already on very, very big wages indeed. So that's really the only, in regarding Williams at least, the only obstacle is the wages. But I feel as though that, you know, if you are in this position, that I think you probably have to kind of take that step. And while, of course, I myself have got concerns about his form this season, and I think anyone raising those points about his form this season are very much well entitled to do so. But I feel as though Arsenal are just such in significant need of competition and of cover and of quality that it certainly is a need for Arsenal to go into the market and add a player like Nico Williams or an alternative. You know that I've got a big appreciation for Ademola Lookman as another potential player that could add certainly goals and creativity to the forward line. We've seen there those links to Bryan Mbeumo for the summer, and many would argue why they couldn't be brought forward if indeed you could convince Brentford to sell. We know Antoine Semenyo is a player that people like. We know Omar Marmoush is said to be in negotiation with Manchester City right now, of course, which would make it harder, of course, to sign an Omar Marmoush. But Man City are working on a deal to try and sign him, plus Lens centre-half Abdulkadir Kusanov, according to David Ornstein as well. There's no agreements, but talks are indeed advancing as Man City are looking to try and do that move. It's an interesting move for Marmoush, of course, because he would be moving to a club that already have a very key starting striker, but you would think that's the delayed replacement for Julian Alvarez. So it seems Marmoush would be off the table, but it certainly would go down as a potential player that Arsenal could have signed, maybe, although how obviously realistic it is to beat Man City to that deal, who knows? But that's the reality of Arsenal's transfer situation, which is a frustration. But we sit here on the 9th of January. There's more than 2 weeks left of the window. I hope that we see a step in the right direction. But if hypothetically Arsenal were not to sign anybody, there are no excuses for me. And I've said that time and time and time again. And we will be collectively, I think, very critical of the decision not to take advantage of what. And I mean, you look at Liverpool last night against Spurs. We're not up against City in the title race. City are, for me, and maybe it's a little premature to say, but for me, I feel like City are out of it. Yes, they could go on a run. Yes, they've started to pick up wins again. But it would take a monumental effort for them to come back from the gap that they find themselves in. They're 6 points behind Arsenal, 6 points behind Forest. They're only 2 behind Chelsea, of course, but they're a monumental 12 points behind Liverpool with a game played more. So that could be 15. So I just can't see City being there. And looking at Liverpool, I can see them dropping points. I've said this to you before. They look fallible. They look like a side that could drop points. The teams that they're beating, of course, they're not blowing them away. Southampton have nearly got a result against Liverpool this season. Brighton have nearly got a result against Liverpool this season, as they did against us, of course, but nearly beat them. I feel as though that this is an opportunity that Arsenal absolutely need to take advantage of. And it's incredibly frustrating that is not going to happen. I just want clarity more than anything about why there is a reluctance this market to do business. That's kind of where I'm at with this one. Now, I'm not lowering my standards. I want to make that very clear. I don't want Arsenal to just sign anybody, but I want Arsenal to go into the market and add quality. But I honestly believe that there is quality in this market. I didn't think it was there as much in the summer, but certainly, and obviously Arsenal sold players on deadline day, which freed up a lot of their finances. But regarding this window, there are players there. There are players that Arsenal could move for. And we've got reason and we've got opportunity to because of the injuries that we're also facing. So that's a really, really, really big thing for us. And before we go to part two, I didn't talk about it yesterday because, of course, we were discussing the game. So indeed, I've delayed this story, of course, to today. But Ed Aarons and Nick Ames of The Guardian broke this story, which certainly has built on from some other whispers that we've heard and I've reported as well, that Tomas Rosicky is a leading candidate to replace Edu. Now, it would be, of course, a move if indeed Rosicky was to be successful. But it would be a move which would happen in the summer. It wouldn't be happening immediately, that he would finish his season with Sparta Praha, before potentially moving on. He's not the only candidate, it's worth pointing out as well. And Ed and Nick have both reported that there are other candidates as well. Luis Campos, of course, who has a contract with PSG expiring in the summer as a consultant there right now, has been linked. But also Brentford's director of football, Phil Giles, is also said to be someone also linked. But Nick and Ed Wright, it is believed that Arsenal would prefer to appoint someone who has an association with the club. So Rosicky, from my perspective, I've written about this. I've done a fair amount of reading on this. I recommend that you do your reading on this too before you formulate a very strong opinion either way. If you're keen on him, if you're not keen on him, do the reading first. Look at what he's actually done before making any assumptions or making any conclusions about Tomas Rosicky, because I've already seen a lot of people sadly embarrass themselves and have quite strong views on Tomas Rosicky, despite knowing little to nothing about what he's ultimately done so far since moving into that sporting director role. In fact, you can read a piece that I wrote myself on the matter and did an interview with Martin Vates, who is a Czech Republic football expert and journalist. So, going to the source and finding out the information about Tomas Rosicky, of course, to find out what he's done and what job he did and he's currently doing, of course, as well, with Sparta Prague. I think that the main barrier for people seems to be that he's doing it at a club that isn't on a Premier League level. Now, they are on a Champions League level, and the reason why they're on a Champions League level is because Tomas Rosicky is one of the main reasons as to why Sparta Prague are even in the Champions League again. Sparta Prague were away from the competition for a very, very, very long time indeed. Close to a decade, they were without Champions League football. And for the first time in 9 years, For the first time in 19 years, they returned to 2 decades to the Champions League. And of course, he's also managed to help them get back to winning titles in the Czech Republic, winning back-to-back titles for the first time in 9 years as well. If it's somebody you're concerned that he wouldn't challenge any decisions, that wouldn't be willing to make tough choices, or that would be weak, be understanding that when he felt like he did not have enough control at Sparta Prague, he tendered his resignation until he was given assurances that he would indeed get greater control over the club's operations, to which Sparta Prague rejected that resignation before then reinstating him as a more powerful figure at the club. Rosicky is an ambitious individual that would only take the jobs if indeed he would be looking at getting a significant amount of control and say in the operations. It wouldn't be one that he'd be looking to go to be a cheerleader, as some so horrendously and misguidedly do indeed suggest. The work he's done at Sparta Prague has been very, very impressive. And the way in which he's taken that club back to a very good level through shrewd recruitment is also very impressive. The biggest barrier, the biggest doubt that people have, of course, is taking that step up. But you have to think about it very clearly. These are positions where it's about scaling up, about taking steps forward. And if you feel as though that Arsenal should be going for somebody that, of course, has got experience at a big club, and that's the only reason why you would go for somebody like that, well, think about the fact that Arsenal did that with a certain Raul Sanllehi, who came in, of course, from his work at Barcelona, where he worked on deals like the Neymar deal and came into Arsenal to work alongside people like Sven Mislintat, of course, and others. And you've got to think about how that went down. So just because you've got that experience of working with those huge clubs does not mean that you will automatically be a success somewhere else. I also think that it is important to have somebody that understands Arsenal, understands the culture, the expectation, and understands, of course, what the ambitions of it are and the ongoing, rhetoric and class that the club strive to achieve always. So I think Tomas Rosicky, as I said before, when it was first linked, I'm not just saying this now that it looks like he's a leading candidate. We did a show about a month ago on this when the first links came out, and I said people shouldn't overlook Tomas Rosicky as a potential option. So that's what is really, really, really important to consider. So please do your reading, do your research, and do your looking into anybody before you formulate a very strong opinion, because you won't embarrass yourself like sadly so many others already have. Right, let's go to part 2, shall we? And your questions right after this. I did that thing where I let the title credits play and I didn't even take a sip of water. So, yeah, indeed. There we go. Hydrated. Let's jump into the chat, shall we? Let's tackle some of your thoughts. And I was kind of already waiting for this. I was waiting for this comment. Joln says, he comes off as a, wait for it, yes man. This is the phrase. I put a tweet out the other day and asked people why. Why do people think that he comes across as a yes man? And I said to explain to me why he comes off as a yes man without using the words he has played or is friends with Arteta. And no one could explain coherently, successfully, without making any reference to the fact that Rosicky used to be in the same team as Arteta forever, however brief a time. And it was a brief period of time, of course, that they spent in the same side. So for some reason, people have this feeling that because Rosicky and Arteta are in the same team together and know one another, and by the way, Arteta knows plenty of others. You know what? I don't know how on earth you can come to that conclusion, or why on earth that you would suspect that. And usually, and I'm going to make an assumption about you, Jones, you probably don't know too much about what Rosicky's done at Sparta Prague. But I recommend doing the. I recommend you do the the reading. Gary says, I'm starting to think the owners are only invested after Super League embarrassment and Champions League status and finance. I doubt their ambitions match ours and Arteta's. And this is the interesting point, is that I think there's a split. There's some people that feel as though that Arteta is responsible for this reluctance in spending this window, or perhaps in the previous window or the summer window. And there is, of course, some that feel as though that Arteta does indeed want to spend, but is not being able to drop the money on the players that he wants. We know that he likes players. We know that Nico Williams is indeed one of those players. But it seems that there is a reluctance from Arsenal, and I don't know if that Arsenal cloud incorporates Arteta in this, but there seems to be a reluctance to drop that money. We're more than a week into the window. And already we are finding ourselves, of course, not being heavily linked or looking to be progressive in any kind of deal for a senior figure. There are, of course, rumours that Arsenal are interested in younger players during this window, and certainly potentially about looking to try and bring in some younger players during this window. It's not, of course, just around the senior figureheads, but also some of the more talented young players like Sverre Nipan, the young Norwegian player. That's also being mentioned. Arsenal are very keen on him, but so far no progression on that front. Tom says, have you heard anything about the Araujo rumour? I know it's another defender, but it seems like a brilliant market opportunity. Of course, Arsenal are short in defence, especially in the middle of defence. If were an injury to occur to Gabriel or Saliba, we would suddenly be very short. So I don't think it's a bad idea for Arsenal to be looking at potentially signing a defender, but it should only be as a secondary to, of course, the offensive players as well. Let's go to Joe, who says, Edu, I feel maybe did a better job than we realised, getting them to spend 100 million on Rice. Whoever comes in has to be able to sell the project to them, and worryingly, Edu seemed to have enough to be able to do that. It's a bit late now for our revisionisms on Edu. Jam says, if the news is to be believed that the club are waiting, why do you think they may have taken that stance? I'm just trying to understand the motivation other than Evra being right. The only explanation I can give you as to why Arsenal would be reluctant to spend is because they are not convinced that the players that they could get in the January window are worth the money that it would take to get them. Just because you have the ability to spend doesn't mean that the club will spend. They have to be convinced, of course, that those players are worth the investment that they are going to cost in this winter window. And in January, those prices are always inflated, other than, of course, you have a release clause in the case of Nico Williams, but the wages, of course, as well are a big sticking point with that potential deal. Lavandra says, Tom, what do you make of those asking for Arteta out? I personally find it ridiculous. I mean, who could they replace him with? He's come second to the very best coach in the world in back-to-back seasons. They're entitled to their opinion, first and foremost. I never feel like it can ever be justified. And certainly we've never had anyone able to come onto the channel to justify that view. But they are entitled to it, Lev. I think there's obviously a large proportion that have always held that view and kind of just come out of the woodwork when things aren't going too well. It's almost become like supporting a team. There's been a footballification, if you like, of the actual position on managers. It's as if it's been kind of weaponized in a way to be like not just an Arsenal fan, and I put that in quotation marks for some, but it's almost become as if you're a fan of being a position on a manager rather than just an Arsenal fan. It's like you have an identity as a fan and you have an identity of being on one side or the other, which is hilariously funny. The idea that you would attach yourself to a movement or or an opinion so strongly that no matter what happens, you have to kind of back it. That's a really dangerous place to put yourself into, and certainly not one that we subscribe to. And that's why if things go wrong, we criticize, and if things do go well, we'll praise it. But it is a very strange dynamic that Arsenal fans, and it's not just Arsenal fans, but in this case, that Arsenal fans in some cases do put themselves into. Joe says, if Arteta fails and Tom, you switch to Arteta out towards the end of his contract, he has won nothing. People will be like, I told you Arteta 3 years ago. Of course, but that's not even football. That's just society, Joe. That's just the way that it goes. It's And that's why people so strongly kind of sit on at a point of view. It's for that feeling of justification. I'm just not keen on that. I'm just not keen on that kind of rhetoric and way of thinking. I won't go into politics, but it's almost like politics these days. It's people that think like a political party is almost like their football team these days, when obviously it shouldn't be. It should be about what's best for the situation. I personally feel that Arteta continues to be best for that situation as well. Erland Az says, Tom is as deluded as Ty and Julian. I mean, Erland, of course, you're more than welcome to come on the channel and tell me why you think that. But my bet is that you probably won't. Silla says, did you hear what Ornstein said about Arsenal? We just talked about it, Silla. Maybe rewind. Black Magic says, do away goals count in the Carabao Cup? No, they don't. There's no away goals in the Carabao Cup. Gooner says, Tom, we need to sort out the left. What do you think about Omar Marmoush? He looks like he's very much on the way to Manchester City, if anywhere, at the moment, Shez. He's also more of a central figure. I know he can play in wide areas, but he has played the majority of his games through the middle for Frankfurt. Gertrick says, what is Arsenal? Is it simply an asset in the Kroenke's portfolio that is suggested to be net positive and nothing else? If you do your research on the ownership and their sporting franchises, you will know that the ambition is obviously there to win things. Especially if you listen to what Josh's words are surrounding the club. There is an ambition for Arsenal to be a very successful club and to win trophies. It's a very old adage about the whole kind of, it's a part of their portfolio that helps them financially. And yes, it does. It's not wrong to say that, but it would be wrong to suggest that there's no ambition to win things. Otherwise, Arsenal would not have spent the amount of money that they have spent comparatively in recent years. They wouldn't have broken the records that they have broken. They wouldn't have given the contracts that they have given to players if indeed they didn't want to win things. But that does not mean they cannot be devoid of criticism when indeed we're in a window where we have to spend and we don't. We need to see that ambition now. We need to see that movement now, and we will make that judgment come the end of course, the window. Michael says, in other news, Graham Potter has been announced as the new head coach of West Ham. Very intrigued to see how, of course, he gets on in that role. And he will be coming to the Emirates when West Ham arrive at the Emirates later on this season. Ant says, if Arteta doesn't get backed, it may not be Arteta out anyway. He might just leave of his own accord. Gary says, the LA Rams are hoovering up talent and still investing for a position of strength. Arteta is ill. Leave before his contract ends up being us with the competitive for what tools that he's given us is amazing. I mean, who are you going for, Gary? Who are you replacing Arteta with? I'd love to know. Dan says, Zidane, Simone, Inzaghi. Is there a comma between Simone and Inzaghi, or is that Simeone and Inzaghi? You have to let me know. Ancelotti, Mancini are all better. No one remembers second place. Mancini, the guy that failed to qualify Italy, of course, for the for the World Cup, hasn't done too much. I think he's been in. Has he been in Saudi or has he been in Qatar recently? Mancini. He was the manager of Saudi Arabia. Of course, he was the head coach of Italy. In terms of Ancelotti, not sure that there's any chance of him leaving Real Madrid at the moment. So I don't really see that one. Dan's not been manager of a team since when? And who was it? And of course, Simone Inzaghi, who so far has not had a job outside of Italy, done a very good job with the best club in Italy, and despite that fact, still finds himself third in the table behind a Napoli side that were previously struggling a lot. They do have 2 games in hand, of course, but they're not exactly running away with the title despite having by far the most money to spend of any club in that league. James says, I would love some viable cover for Ødegaard right now for rotation ability and competition. It's why I'm a little gutted that now Barcelona have managed to register Dani Olmo. I always said to you that I thought that they would be able to register him. I couldn't see that not happening, and that has been certainly justified. But I'm with you, James, especially with Ethan Nwaneri out. I wouldn't be against the idea of a versatile attacking player who also can play in those attacking midfield positions. Delta Source says, Tom, you've looked into the manager's eyes. Is he signing a striker in I'd be very surprised, even before looking into Arteta's eyes, if he was going to sign a striker, Delta Source. I always felt it would be, if anybody, a wide player that Arsenal would be looking to bring in. Grant says, sorry, I've already covered that if we had to pick between Williams now, but not enough funds for Isak in the summer, or no one now and Isak in the summer, which of course is Isak in the summer, Grant. But the problem is that that's not a scenario that is guaranteeable. It's a scenario that could exist. Arsenal signing a big player in January could potentially, if indeed was possible to sign Isak in the summer, it could stop them from doing that. It could prevent them from signing Isak. So if you're telling me that we have to wait 6 months before bringing in a forward player and that forward player is going to be Isak, of course I would wait. The problem is that I have serious doubts if indeed Isak is gettable whatsoever. And of course, whether or not it would matter anyway. So it's difficult with that. Gary says, I don't want Arteta out, Tom. I think he's done amazing with what he's been done on the budget he's been given. I don't think anyone else could make us as competitive as he has with the tools that he's been given. I'm glad that we see eye to eye on that, Gary. Manali says, Gunner blogger suggested a reluctance to recruit might be down to the board considering this is a dud season and therefore better to wait until the summer. Well, that would be really naive if that's the case. And I'm not saying that James is wrong, by the way. I'm not saying that it's him saying this. What I'm saying is, of course, if indeed that hypothesis is accurate and that the club do indeed see this something as a season where luck, as James Bend wrote a fantastic piece on yesterday, if luck has indeed deserted Arsenal, should they just kind of draw a line under the season and go again? Now, I've always been telling you that 2025 is meant to be a huge year, and it was always seen under Edu prior to him leaving, and I don't know if him leaving has changed that, but it was always seen that 2025, and in particular the summer and the subsequent 25-26 season, was always seen as a massive moment in the Arsenal project. But the reality is, of course, that Edu is not here anymore. But that doesn't mean that, of course, that we shouldn't be looking to try and take advantage. There are cup competitions available. Arsenal can go to Newcastle and win, and we don't have that game until February. Arsenal could strengthen this window and go to St James's Park in a stronger place. I asked Arteta that question myself, if he believed that the squad would be in a stronger place come February when we face Newcastle again. And we have the opportunity to do that. And so I think it would be a big mistake not to do that. Ezra says Arteta has been given 800 million. Ezra, do you know how much Liverpool have spent since Klopp arrived on top of what was inherited? Do you know what Manchester City has spent since Pep Guardiola arrived on top of what was inherited? Just let me know if you know those numbers. I'd love for you to tell me what you think they are. Manali says, I don't think we will get Isak. Much more likely we'll go for potential with huge upsides. Sesko feels like a potential profile, definitely a player that Arsenal have had interest in before. Tuta says, but the chance of getting Isak in the summer is so slim and Newcastle won't allow him to go, especially if they qualify for the Champions League. It's better they sign someone now to ease that pressure. And that's where I sit. I don't think Isak is possible in the summer. I think it would be very hard. There's a chance, if it's going to happen, it would be in the summer. There's a chance. It would only happen in the summer if at all. But I find it very hard to see that happening. Arsenal have proven me wrong in the past. I didn't think we'd go over 100 million for Declan Rice, and we did. So they've proven me wrong with their ability or ambition to go and spend that level of money. But I would find it very difficult to see them doing that in the summer. Burns says, never have and never will be Arteta out. But if everyone can see that we need a striker and a winger and the club refuses to support what the team and Arteta needs right now, then I doubt they will ever get us. I think it's dangerous to say that you never would. What's the difference between saying I never have and never will be a fan of Arteta? What's the difference between that and saying I never have and never will be of an opinion that he should leave? Maybe it's a better way of putting it. I know that the label of Arteta out is not a label anybody, well, some people like it, but not the label any really sensible person would want attached to them, of course. But I always am stopping short of jumping on that bandwagon. I think it's dangerous to pin yourself to a mast so strongly that you feel that you never, ever would. A manager is not the club. You're not a fan of Arteta in the way that you're a fan of Arsenal. You shouldn't be, because these are individuals, like the players and managers, with the lack of a better phrase available to me, are disposable. You know, they are temporary. They are not permanent. And so while Arsenal is always forever going to be permanent, you should never be in a position where you're so pinned to the mast of one side or the other, that you could never ever foresee you being one way or the other, because that means you don't have an open mind on the subject. I know the sentiment burn is positive and I get it, and I'm not having a go at you. I just think it's important to address that point of view, because pinning yourself to one mast and never leaving it, or never having an openness to changing your mind, would be a little short. Tech's gone for a list of managers, and I'm reluctant to read it out because I've just seen Unai Emery's name on that list. But Tech says Mendilibar, Joachim Low, Zidane, Terzic, Allegri, Xavi, Klopp, Marco Silva, Nuno. Nuno, of course, who was sacked by Tottenham after 8 weeks. Sorry, Simeone. Sorry, a guy that's has the same amount of trophies in the same amount of time. I'll tell you, Inzaghi, Unai Emery. Michel, look where Girona are now. Gasparini, Deschamps, De La Fuente, Scaloni, Xabi Alonso, all better than Arteta. Oh, Tech, you're a good man. You're a good man, Tech. Sugar says, Tom, surely if Newcastle don't get Champions League football, Isak won't be wanting to spend. We're second in the league last time I checked. We're second in the league. Who's talking about Arsenal not getting Champions League football? We can have that conversation if it looks like Arsenal aren't going to get it, sure. But Arsenal are second right now, 6 points off the top. Chances, I do hope that we get some reinforcements in this window, but I highly doubt it will happen. As for Isak in the summer, I highly doubt it will also happen due to its costs, but we need to stay positive. RRDM says, fans in England should hold a peaceful protest and share... of what? A peaceful protest of what? What are people protesting? I don't get that comment. I mean, I understood back in the day when people had protests to a degree. Even then, it was often hijacked by some pretty unsavory individuals. But I don't know what the need for protest is. I'm getting flashbacks. It's back in 2013 again. 2012, 2013. Leroy says, Tom, what is the minimum the club does this year to keep the trust in Arteta as person? I feel like that we have gone backwards and lost some faith. It's interesting that people feel this way, Leroy, that we've gone backwards. I know that the football's not been perhaps as free-flowing and as dominant, but I think that's probably easily explained by the players that have been available and the injuries that we've suffered and the misfortune that we've had. Because despite the fact that people think we've gone backwards, we've gone further in the League Cup than last season. We're sitting very pretty in the Champions League table so far. We are second in the league on the same number of points as what we were at the same stage last season. This despite the fact, of course, that we've been missing our two best players for significant portions of the season. And, of course, the players that we spent money on in the summer have also been missing for significant parts of the campaign as well as who, for me and many, was the best right-back in the league last season in Ben White. So I always struggle with the idea that Arsenal have gone backwards. I know that the football isn't as pretty to watch and it's not necessarily as convincing, but I do think that is more as a consequence of the team and the reality of that. Wayne, of course, still lives in binary world, says we didn't win the league last season neither, Tom. Yes, we didn't win the league last season. We finished the second half of the season by dropping points in just 2 games. Arsenal were incredibly consistent. And the only reason that we didn't win the league last season was just because Man City were 2 points better than us. And considering the resources and the manager and everything besides that, that's not a surprise, is it? It's not a surprise at all. That was what happened. But the reality is, of course, for Arsenal, what they've achieved, based upon what they've spent, based upon what they have, is still incredibly impressive. Silla says, might be a stupid question, but why has Wenger never come out and spoken about what the owners put him through after leaving? Or has he done any sort of interview regarding his relationship with the owners and that management? Don't know. He obviously wrote a book, and a lot of people thought that in that book we would hear quite a lot of revealing things. In the end, while it was an insightful and interesting read, I did feel it was something of a letdown. As I thought the Wenger documentary was also something of a, not in its production and its quality, but in terms of its content and what it revealed, I thought both were not as intriguing and not as revealing as I thought they may have been prior to that. I remember it was a thing back when watching, the Wenger years in the late noughties and the early 2010s when there was the most controversy, not certainly during his golden era as Arsenal manager. There was a lot, the classic line just used to be, we will have to wait and see when the book comes out to find out what really happened. Well, the book came out and we never found out. So never, ever, believe that you're ever going to find out these things. Fizzy says, if you actually look at the eye test, this is Fizzy, our regular eye test merchant, we have really regressed. The ultimate goal is to win one of the majors, and that doesn't look like happening. Well, we got closer to, of course, a cup final this season than last season already, in the sense of the League Cup, of course. And not only that, of course, but Arsenal sit, as I said, on the same number of points as they were. At this point last season, Fizzy, we were 4th. We're 2nd this time around. And of course, had I offered to you the chance to be 6 points ahead of Manchester City at the start of the season, I think people probably would have taken that. Liverpool have been very impressive. And I think that Liverpool have overachieved in relation to the reality of the situation. But a lot of things have gone their way and things have been going for them that haven't, of course, gone for Arsenal. And we've had to deal with that. I think it's I think if you are dismissing all of the factors that have happened to Arsenal this season, which you're entitled to do, I just can't foresee you ever having a grounded, holistic look at what's happened to Arsenal this season and coming to a fair conclusion about where Arsenal are. I asked Arteta myself before the game against Brentford. Let me see if I can find the question and the exact quote. Every word. London, Brentford, Arsenal. Every word. No, not that one. Said on Brentford. Sterling. Here it is. Okay. Points. The question. Where's the question? Where's the question? Is that it? That can't be all of it, surely. Oh, it wasn't the Brentford game. Must have been a different. Maybe it was the Brighton game. Yes, it was the Brighton game because that's the game that we would have been 2 points ahead of our tally had we have won. Here we go. So the same number of points or 2 more points than the previous season. Where is the question? Where is the question? Here it is. I said, if you win tomorrow, you'll be 2 points better off after 20 games. Do you get the sense that your team is performing to a higher level? Arteta says, to a higher level, yes. And especially to a higher level with a lot of very different circumstances and challenges that we've had this year. That's why I think that we've made big improvements in that sense. And this is what I'm talking about, is that while we don't look as offensively impressive, I personally think that the eye test makes us look worse because we don't have the players that we have had in those seasons. And those that are available, of course, have also had their own issues. Odegaard's previous injury and now illness. Illness in the squad through this festive period. The missing of, in my opinion, the best right back in the league last year of Ben White. Timber has stepped up in a great way, but the back four I foresaw this season was White, Saliba, Gabriel, Timber as my back four with a fully fit Ben White, which has obviously sadly not been available to us. So this idea that the eye test makes us think, it's kind of a like, well, duh. Of course we don't look as good. We're missing our best player. We were missing our other best player. The signings that we've made have been barely available to us and not yet up to speed because of the injuries they've suffered. We've currently got illness within the group. We've suffered the most ridiculous misfortune in terms of some decisions that haven't gone our way. And despite that fact, and what's interesting, I think, was the narrative that came after the game against Newcastle. Someone left a comment, I think it was Kwame left a comment on yesterday saying Newcastle played Arsenal off the park on Tuesday night. Now, call me cynical, but I don't think Arsenal were played off the park on Tuesday night. I said this yesterday. I said, I don't think we played particularly badly. I think we finished horrendously. In fact, I think Sam Dean put a tweet out yesterday with an attached article. Let me see if I can find it. Where, yes, it's just a tweet. It says, in terms of the narrative around Arsenal, last night truly was an incredible time to produce statistically the worst finishing performance of any Premier League team in 24-25. 1 week into the window, 2 weeks since Saka's injury, and on the other side, Isak scored his 10th in 9 games. The bigger picture, the context of Tuesday night's game was one of, look at one end of the pitch, there's Alexander Isak and Anthony Gordon. Look at the other end of the pitch, you've got Kai Havertz, who had his worst performance in an Arsenal shirt. You've got Trossard on the wrong side, and Martinelli, who missed a massive opportunity to give Arsenal the lead in that game. Timber should have given us the lead. Martinelli, in my opinion, should have given us the lead. We had a great chance with Saliba and Havertz, also a deflective effort that should have given us the lead. We created enough in that game to score more than 2 goals. So this idea that Arsenal were played off the park, no, Newcastle came and did an excellent job on Arsenal. An excellent job on Arsenal. The chances came for Newcastle and they took them. They also missed a couple of good opportunities as well, it's worth pointing out. 2 Tonali, I think, scarred one over the bar. I think Joe Linton hit one over the bar. There was one at the end where Harvey Barnes, I think, went through and we defended it quite well. They had 2 chances that were of excellent standing and they scored them both. Arsenal had created 6, according to the numbers, big chances in that game, didn't score any. They created more XG than they did shots on target. For me, the biggest problem Arsenal have had this season is finishing. I'll fall on this sword. Finishing has been Arsenal's biggest problem. It's another reason why we absolutely, in my opinion, need to go and sign a forward during this window to add that extra ability for us. We absolutely need to try and find that this window. Nick says, Tom, you can't blame players for the eye test. United looked good against Liverpool and none of their players get into our team. How could United play flowing, attacking football? We can't. Nick, first and foremost, of course, Manchester United could potentially have been the worst example you could have given. Erik ten Hag, when, of course, he left Man United, I think they were in 13th place. And since replacing their manager, they have risen to an amazing 13th place. They've also managed to beat Manchester City this season. We have also beaten Manchester United since they've changed coaches and, of course, play them this weekend as well. And we'll be, again, weakened in doing so and facing them. The players that we saw, and also you have to remember that United-Liverpool is an incredible rivalry that obviously does raise the stakes. And as that cliche goes, form goes out the window when it comes to those types of rivalries. So I don't think it's the best example, Nick. Sometimes you just play better. The occasion, the context does indeed. So taking one performance and running with it is never going to be the best example. You want to look at a collection of results, a collection of performances. And we know this season that Arsenal, I think there is an element of recency bias in the assessment of Arsenal, because if you actually have a look back upon our season and you go from the start of the season, we deserve to beat Wolves. I think we edged the game against Villa, very difficult team, of course, away from home. Again, we lost last season that we won 2-0. I think we deserve to beat Brighton. And were it not for that Declan Rice red card, we win it. We deserve to beat Spurs. We deserve to beat Manchester City away from home. And if it wasn't for a ridiculous red card, we win that game. Score 4 against Leicester. We beat PSG. Score 3 against Southampton. I personally think that even going down to 10 men at Bournemouth, if Martinelli takes that chance when we're down to 10 men and we go 1-0 up, I think we win that game. I think necessarily we deserve to win it based upon the performance. No, but it's one chance that 0-0 with 10 men that we shouldn't have been down to 10 men based upon other decisions that we've seen after Saliba's red card. We win that game. I think we were better than Liverpool when they came to Anfield. And I think we were incredibly hard done by. Certainly at the end of that game, there was that very controversial incident with that one-on-one chance that wasn't allowed to go through because Andy Taylor, again, decided to blow his whistle. Newcastle away, no excuses, terrible performance. Chelsea away, at the end, that chance, Trossard scores, Saliba is onside, we should win the game. We beat the third best team in the league this season in Nottingham Forest, 3-0 at home. Deservedly so. One of the best teams in the league so far. We beat them comfortably at home. One of the best teams in Europe at the point that we played them in Sporting. 5-1. One of the best performances we've seen away from home in Europe. 5 goals scored at West Ham. Beat Man United 2-0. Dominate Fulham and just, again, can't take our chances. Thomas Partey will hang his head in shame for missing that chance that he had from the corner. Beat Monaco very comfortably 3-0 at home. Dominated Everton again, couldn't take our chances. 8 goals in 2 games against Crystal Palace. Dominate Ipswich and just win by the single goal. Should have been more. Very good performance. Only 2 league games ago at Brentford. Very good performance against a very difficult side away from home. Only 2 games ago without Saka. Without Ødegaard. Winning at Brentford. And then we go to Brighton, and I'm sorry, but yes, it wasn't an amazing performance, but we take the lead for a good goal. And the only reason that Brighton score in that game is because they're gifted a penalty, in my opinion. And no, I do not agree with Howard Webb's assessment. And I do not want to see penalties given for that incident that we saw at Brighton in the future for any team. Arsenal, Spurs, Liverpool, whoever. I do not want to see those chances. So when they start the idea, and Yasser says, Tom, you can't rewrite the season with ifs. You can do the same thing in the other way around. Margins are fine. You could try to do it the other way around, but you would be nowhere near as successful. The reality is, based upon the context of our season and the recency bias that fans have over this December period in particular that has been without Bukayo Saka, our most important player, and Odegaard not fully fit and available, and of course the illness that's affecting this team, is that we could be in a much better place. The biggest thing that has separated Arsenal from the title challenge being far better has been finishing. Finishing has been our enemy, and injuries alongside that too. And people would like to say excuses because it's easy, but the reality is these are just reasons. It's easy to type into your little keyboard that you're hiding behind the word excuses, but these are just genuine reasons. And whenever I invite you on to have a chat or a conversation for you to put forward these arguments, to tell me yourself that you think these are excuses and for you to explain why, you never show up. And so that's why I don't let it get to me anymore. There's a bit of clarity yesterday, I thought, after the performance, after defeat. You can't satisfy all those trolls. And I want to address another point that will, as Wayne has seen in the chat box, that will get you blocked. But these suggestions that now, because this new role I have, which, by the way, barely has changed my job in the sense of what I was doing before. Before I got this new role, I was going to games, reporting stories. The only difference in the job that I have now compared to the job that I had previously was that I've gone into that lead role. I'm now going to all the games, not just the London games. And I'm in Mikel Arteta's press conferences more often. And I'm able to report on more stories. They're the differences. So when you see what are very libelous comments made, claiming that for some reason this job means that I am being paid by Arsenal, or that I am unable to criticise the club in any way, shape or form, which is hilarious. Hilariously, not only offensive, but of course, very legally incorrect. Can I just lay it out for the record that that is so beyond the truth? And anybody with a brain, of course, I know, knows that. But for anyone that might be quivering or worrying that I'm in some way unable to criticise or ask difficult questions like I did after the Brighton game when I asked Arteta about what I perceived to be taking too long on set pieces and corners, to which, trust me, he was not happy to answer. May I make that very clear to you right now in this clear moment. And anyone saying from this point, you're not welcome here and you will be blocked. And if you want to come to me personally about it, feel free. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. My DMs are open as always. You can ask me any questions you like, and I will indeed answer them for you. So I just want to make that very, very clear, because I take that accusation incredibly seriously. Any suggestion of, I think I saw someone use a comment before, brown envelopes. I take it very, very seriously. So just think about it, because that's not the reality. Let's jump into the chat a little bit more. Yasser says, I agree with you. All is not negative and some fans are negative. I believe in this team. What I don't understand is just how our attack has gone backwards these last years. Again, Yasser, these last years, this idea that our attack has gone backwards, your words, these last years. Last season, Arsenal scored more goals than they have ever scored in any Premier League season. More than the double winning side, more than the Invincibles. This idea that Arsenal's attack has gone backwards in your words, these last years, plural. How can that be an accurate opinion to hold? You can say that we don't this season look as offensively dangerous. I have absolutely no problem in that view. But this kind of whitewashing of Arsenal's last seasons and using terms like years. It's like when people incorrectly say Arteta hasn't won anything in the last 5 years. If you want to say the last 4 years, I've got no issue with that. I'm not going to sit here like Arteta did personally. I think he was made a mistake when he brought up the Community Shield in that press conference. I found that a little embarrassing. I found it a little embarrassing when he talked about the ball in the press conference the other day as well. It didn't make me feel comfortable. It made me cringe a little bit. I wouldn't personally have done that. But let's speak factually about this. Arsenal in these last years have scored more goals in the last 2 seasons and broke records successfully in goal scoring. This season, we have lost our most potent player, our most offensive option. Our most creative player spent the majority of the first half of the season out and subsequently then ill and not with it. It's not surprising. And despite the fact that we are struggling, despite the fact that our players have been injured or ill, or indeed we've had ridiculous decisions go against us, despite all of those things, Arsenal are still sitting on the same number of points, on the same point that they were last season. The same number of points. Let's go to and Finish 22 says, so many excuses. Like, again, if you want to come on and have a chat and tell me why you think that that's excuses, the door is open to you. Just let me know and I will platform it. If you feel like there's not enough balance on this platform, if you feel like I've only got one opinion and I'm not willing to listen to any other, and that this is a echo chamber, the door is open to you to bring that balance. It's always there. Never think that it's not. James D says, no point arguing, we're stupid. Back in Lasagna says, see, I can understand it from a statistical perspective that we're scoring more now than we did in the Invincible season, but the game has changed in these last 20 years. And it's changed in the last 3 years, mate. It's changed in the last 3 years. The way in which teams approached Arsenal at the start of the 22-23 season and the way in which teams approach Arsenal in the 24-25 season could not be more different. Teams are fearful of Arsenal. Not in these last few weeks. There's certainly been openings that they've looked to exploit. But overall, the way in which Arsenal have been approached by the opposition is ultimately different because we are better. We're competing for titles and teams go up against. Arsenal used to be a bit of a laughing stock in terms of the league, in terms of Troy Deeney coming out. I find it difficult sometimes. I see Troy Deeney in the press lounge sometimes, and every ounce of the fan inside me wants to say, look, mate, do you think Arsenal got cojones in the last few years? It takes every professional ounce of me to not. But we were a laughing stock. And I empathise with him a bit to a degree. I get where he's coming from. He didn't put it across in the right way or in a very professional way. But teams could get at Arsenal. They could kick you. We would shy away. That's not the case. We've changed that perception. We've changed that culture at the club. And Arteta and the team and the players have done that. So it's changed in these last 2 to 3 years in terms of perspective and the way in which they play us. So be aware of that. Be aware of it. Ikaz says the difference is set pieces. Our forwards have dropped off a cliff since 22-23. Set pieces have always been a thing in the last 3 years. We went the 22-23 season. I don't think we conceded from a set piece until we played, was it Wolves in the last few games of the campaign? We went on a ridiculous run of being... It's not just this season that we've been good at set pieces. The reason why set pieces are being focused on so much is they're popping up in big games. We're not scoring as many goals this season, of course, so those set pieces become more prominent in our minds. We were always good at set pieces. We've been good at set pieces for the last 3 years. But without our key players available to us and our attack looking weaker, those set pieces become more prominent. They become more prominent. And we're not like miles ahead of like other teams in terms of set piece scoring. It's not like we've got double the amount of set piece goals that other teams have got. I am making an assumption there, but certainly on a table that I saw a few weeks ago, we were only like 2 ahead of the next team in terms of goals from set pieces in the league. So we've been good at set pieces for like the last 3 years. Jova's been with us for the last 3 years. We've been good at set pieces for a long time, not just this season. They are standing out more because we are, and our finishing has not been good enough from open play. And that's why they do stand out more than usual. But this set piece kind of agenda is a bit of a strange one. Fizzy says, you can mention the same number of points thing on the belief that we can replicate what we did in the last 18 games last season. Do you honestly believe that we can do that? Not without the players. No, not without Saka. Not without Wyatt. Not with this situation we find ourselves in, Fizzy. No, I don't think we will replicate the same number of points. And the main reason why I believe that we won't replicate that same number of points as we would and had done last season is because of the players that are available to us. And that is why we need to go in the market. To bring this whole conversation full circle, this is why the transfer window this January is so important. So important. And that there are no excuses for Arsenal not to go out and spend some money. None, zero, kaput, nothing. There are no reasons why Arsenal shouldn't be going and trying to sign players this window and being successful. Because we absolutely have to go out and try and do that. We absolutely have to go into the window and do that. If it comes to February and it comes to that game against Man City and it comes to that game against Newcastle and I'm looking at a lineup that doesn't contain any signings, besides them getting injured immediately in their first training session like Nico Moreno, if I don't see any signings in those squads, I'm going to be absolutely gutted and very frustrated that we didn't take advantage of this January window. Very disappointed indeed. So that's where I'm at with it. I don't think we will replicate what we did in the second half of last season, predominantly because we don't have the players available to us that we had then. And we have these issues going on at the moment. And secondly, because from what we're hearing, we're not going to utilize the January window as we should do. And thirdly, some of the senior players in this squad have not been good enough. Trossard has not been good enough. Jesus, besides these last few weeks, but even in the last last week, has not been good enough this season, besides a few good games in the last month. Sterling on loan. Sterling has not been good enough in what we've seen from him. Kai Havertz in the last game was nowhere near the expected level. For a player that we spent that much money on, the chance that he missed was near unforgivable. So that's the reality, Fizzy. That's where my head's at. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate your time as always. Doors always open. Maintain that to you. If you've got any questions, if you want to come to me personally with something, as I mentioned, the DMs are indeed open on Instagram at the Gooner Talk, on Twitter at the Gooner Talk TV. Always open to a chat. Always welcome to find that balance. Always welcome to hear the other side of the story, if indeed you're able to be respectful. So please do indeed take up that opportunity if you're very, very keen to do so. Thank you for listening. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, of course, as we look ahead to that game against Manchester United. Mikel Arteta will face the press tomorrow afternoon, but there will be a show tomorrow morning. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.